guys, so we are up to day 3 of Samapana retreat. So ether element or Akasha, there's a few different names I'll mention those to you in just a little while. The Akasha or ether is acted upon by the life-giving prana or creative force, which is what we did on day 1. Call into existence in never-ending cycles for all things and all phenomena to come into existence. So this primary substance is that which becomes gross matter. Okay. So nada is the flow of sound, and it is sound that brings consciousness into form. So this is why it's very important whenever we're doing sacred logos, whenever we're doing power statements, whenever we're doing installations, when we're bringing this frequency into our space, then that gives it more of a higher possibility to crystallize rather than just doing an affirmation, because you're taking it in through the form of frequency. So nada is the flow of sound. Why do we mention that to start with? Because there's a correspondence between Akasha and sound, isn't there? Do we know what that correspondence is?
It has to do with the chakra and with the energy body, which is another 5, which is throat.
Exactly, right? So it's connected to the throat chakra, it is connected to sound. It does have another things that kind of correspond to that. It is actually the source of speech, listening and creativity, yeah? So what happens is right at the top, nada, the flow of sound will start to collapse. As it collapses, it creates Akasha, which is space. It then collapses further into actually creating and producing the rest of the elements. Yeah? And then from there we have these infinite waveforms. And what happens is when these infinite waveforms, when they kind of hit a cross-section, then that is actually when the next step of creation process happens. And what it actually creates are atoms, electrons and protons at that level. So then we have a further collapsing down, and it steps down into the macrocosmic nous, and that's where we've got a mixture of creation and matter. So it's the non-material stuff as well as the base material stuff, and it's starting to mix up at this level of macrocosmic nous. Nous meaning, in English, mind. Yeah? Great. Then it steps down further from there into what's known as more kind of regular waveforms. They start to become something that is more recognizable, perhaps by science and people. Yeah? And then from the regular waveforms, it then collapses into the psyche of all living things, where micronous continues the materialization of the creation process. So, you know how it says in the Bible, first there was the Word, and the Word was God. That would be nada, I suppose, in this instance. And it is nada, this flow of sound, which is almost like the very beginning of the creation process, Akasha. Okay? But don't forget that Akasha, we did cover this on Prana Day. Do you know what is required in order for Akasha to flow? It requires prana. It requires the pranic element in order for the Akasha to flow through it into the material realms. So it does actually have like a little bit of some combination of names, or a variety rather of names, yeah? So one we know, obviously, it's Akasha. Can we think of another name for it as well? Any other name apart from Akasha? Space, yeah? Ether, which in Greek is ethers, yeah? Now another word for space, as you mentioned, is also the void. Now, the interesting thing about the word void is that it isn't actually void, is it? So how can it be empty if it's full of possibility? Yeah, so we call it the void, we call it the empty, but it's actually very full of potentiality, yeah? There is a couple of other words that correspond to it. Another one, guys, would be spirit. So spirit is also akin to Akasha, akin to ether, akin to ethera, okay? Now, another interesting thing that I came across this week, and I should have thought of it earlier, but I didn't, I guess. But another word for spirit also, guys, is electricity. And then I had this moment, right, this kind of flash, and I thought, wow, you know. So this whole electric universe theory now makes sense. Do you know what I mean? Because everything is actually electricity. You know, your energy is electricity, everything is electricity. And it's this electrical circuit that we're trying to get to rise up from the base through what's known classically as Kundalini energy, but it's actually electricity to rise back up in order to come back into sacred union and be one again with the source. So, perhaps, another word for spirit could be electricity, also consciousness. Remember how we spoke last week about there are many varieties or categories of consciousness? Yeah? So I guess electricity can be categorized in this way as well. So guys, that kind of covers our intro for today. Thanks very much for coming in. Don't forget to come in tomorrow to cover fire element. Helen Makes Miracles on Instagram, on Facebook, YouTube, and what else have I forgotten? Periscope, of course. Don't forget to follow and share. See you tomorrow.